2014 Bob Friend Memorial Lecturer follows a long list of illustrious predecessors. We've welcomed here John Riley, head of Sky News, Mark Thompson, who was then Director General of the BBC, Jon Snow, presenter of Channel 4 News, Alex Crawford, Sky's award-winning foreign correspondent, and last year's lecturer was Stephanie Flanders, who was then economics editor at the BBC. This evening's Bob Friend lecturer is Stuart Ramsay, Sky's chief correspondent. You'll recognise him as the award-winning journalist who played a crucial part in winning for Sky News a prestigious Royal Television Society award for its coverage from Pakistan's Valley. He's won personal awards for his coverage of the Taliban, for reporting the Pakistan earthquake. He's a former London Press Club Journalist of the Year. He's won a Golden Nymph at the Monte Carlo Television Awards. I could go on. Perhaps the most glowing comment I've heard about Stuart in the last 24 hours was from a friend of mine, Alan Little, one of the BBC's top conflict correspondents, who said Stuart is simply the foreign correspondent's foreign correspondent. Everybody rates him as amongst the very, very best. I think I'd second that. Stuart's covered 15 wars from Chechnya through Africa, the Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq. And he knows more about reporting from a hostile environment than almost anybody in the business. Indeed, so much as you know about it, I was deeply worried last night when Stuart was actually in Moscow that he wouldn't get here this morning. I thought I could phone call saying he found Victor Yanukovych should have been interviewing him for Sky instead. I'm kind of surprised that he didn't. I suspect that's next week. Anyway, before Stuart speaks, let's see a few recent highlights from his reporting career.
This is a war. It's like this every day.
President Assad might try to silence the people, but there are 6 mosques that are turning out now. The sniper you can hear in the background, that's been fairly continuous now for the last 15 minutes or so.
This is unusual. These rebel fighters are all women.
We've been told to lie down because of the snipers, so we're crossing a very small culvert.
From safe to dangerous in moments. The snipers' bullets care nothing about age. These Taliban fighters make and lay the bombs that have maimed, injured and killed so many British and American soldiers. Everything is hostile out here.
All over Helmand province, British forces are engaged in firefights daily.
Far side, far side.
Far left.
Yeah, someone on the far left.
This was actually worse than we thought.
It's going over. It's gone? It's gone. Let's wait till they sort this out.
Yeah.
And then we'll do it, okay?
All right, just stand by for the water's coming in.
The Philippines have been hit by many, many storms, but nothing quite like this.
The bad news is that another storm is predicted to hit in the next 24 hours or so.
Many of those who died lie where they were found. In wrecked buildings, survivors scavenge for food. 9 people have died on this street corner this week. Not one had a gun.
The Taliban say that they put a sentry much further down the road to see where any American or British convoy is coming, and then they will pull the command wire and it explodes. As I say, it's deadly efficient. They've put this in a few minutes.
It's the largest drop of ordnance on a single target recorded in this phase of the Afghan war.
It's quite a difficult day already. What with the accidents that have happened, and we've got to go down there.
A unique insight into the workings of a Taliban bomb team over. They told us never to return. Stuart Ramsay, Sky News, Afghanistan.
Hello everyone. It's quite a lot of fighting in that actually. I did wake up in Moscow this morning, and I was worried that I would actually get here. I've also been working for the last 4 weeks on a 4-hour time zone difference, so you can bear with me if I'm not very coherent at times. It's quite late now and I'm quite tired. Foreign correspondents are quite chuffed when they say that they commute to work on an aeroplane. This morning I came back to Britain on an Aeroflot economy class ticket. I can assure you it's not all that glamorous all the time. I don't see myself, and I don't think I am, a war reporter. I am, as Tim said, it's hostile environment reporter. I've covered a lot of wars, of course, but I think it's worth talking about hostile environments and the type of stories that we do in them, because they're difficult in their own right. The Japanese tsunami, for example, the Philippines that you saw in that clip there, the Pakistan earthquake, 70,000 people died in that, and the Congo volcanic eruption a few years ago that wiped out whole towns at a time. What is interesting about covering those type of stories is that they're extremely difficult because there's bodies, there's displaced people, the buildings are about to fall down, there's a chance of disease, there's no aid agencies there. So they are a developing story in many ways. It's beyond the initial incident that brings the journalists there in the first place. And if you take, for example, after the tsunami, the aftershocks and the Congo volcanic eruption, the aftershocks for that were as big as any recorded earthquakes. And by that stage, you're actually in it. And so very easily, you can become as much as a victim as the people who are already suffering. Now, they're suffering worse than you, for sure. But you've got to understand that you have to look after yourself. You've got to be equipped to look after yourself. And in a way, that poses problems as well. So, for example, in the Philippines, I arrived through miles and miles of destroyed buildings, people on the streets with nothing, in a bus. And our bus was full of water and food. There were no aid agencies. We are by definition a target. And you can't just hand it out, because if you do, you are definitely going to be a victim very quickly. So that is something that you have to think about when you're doing hostile environments. And as I say, they're every bit as hard as dodging bullets. And actually, when I'm on the dodging bullets front, if somebody's actually shooting at you, if it ever happens to any of you, don't run away. You take cover. You'd think the best thing to do is to run, but actually it isn't. Statistically, you're more likely to get shot if you try to leg it. And if you actually look at the Great War pictures that you see from cameramen, they are, or camera women as well, they are the ones who are stood still. They don't run, they take cover, but they're the pictures that make the difference in the reporting. I have to say that most journalists like myself have a tendency to leg it, but even if you don't meant to. 20 years at Sky, 21 years actually now, and I have covered many, many wars. Actually, I think after his hour, about 17, Tim. I remember the first time I was actually shot at, and it was in Georgia, the former Soviet Republic that had separated and was entering into basically a pretty nasty civil war. And I had hooked up with a young aid worker called Francis Mwanza. He went on to become the head of the World Food Programme, but he'd been in wars, he knew stuff. He was still very young, but he did know what he was doing. Anyway, we had decided that having been in a pretty nasty situation, we had to get back to the capital, Tbilisi, and we decided that we would attempt this journey at night. There was actually no choice. We had to. There had been a lot of fighting, so we knew it was going to be quite dangerous. And we knew there's always the possibility of checkpoints. So checkpoints in wars are an absolute nightmare. They're one of the worst things you'll ever come across because you don't know who's on them. I slightly digress here, but I remember in Liberia being taken out of a car by a 12-year-old who was drunk and with a gun, and he put it in my mouth. And I realised then I had to do something pretty quick, so I acted like a dad, clipped him around the ear, took the gun off it and gave it to his senior commanding officer, who was 14. Anyway, sorry, going back. So Francis and I are driving along the road. Francis, by this stage, had gone to sleep. And we were driving on quite quickly, and we went through a checkpoint without stopping. We didn't see the checkpoint, the driver certainly didn't. The rounds came in through the back window and out through the front. He carried on driving. And Francis opened one eye, looked at me and said, "That was close," and went back to sleep. I, of course, with clenched buttocks throughout the next 3 hours, waiting to try and get back to Tbilisi. It was terrifying. Now, Francis had experienced something like it before. And I think the two things that came out of that is that there is absolutely no point worrying about what didn't happen to you, because you're just wasting your energy. You've got to be thinking about what is going to happen next. And I've got lots of friends who have suffered post-traumatic stress because they're continually worrying about what didn't happen, as opposed to just putting it aside. The second thing is that it's never, ever as you expect it is going to be. Never, ever. And sometimes it's worse, but actually, usually, touch wood, it's better. And that's something that will come up quite a lot in this talk, about how things appear to be going one way and aren't. So wars, well, Chechnya, Angola, Sudan, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Iraq. I was there for 3 months with the American military. That was very hard. Afghanistan, I've been there every year since 2001. The West Bank, Israel, Lebanon, Libya, obviously, Yemen, and more recently, Syria. I've been going there quite a lot since 2011. They're all very different. Sometimes you're embedded with soldiers, sometimes you're alone, and they're at different locations. Sometimes they're very cold, sometimes they're extremely hot. But one thing that definitely unites them is that at various times they are all terrifying. They always will be, which you sort of expect with a war, but I guarantee you they are. I've been asked, we discussed it, that I'm going to tell you about, or try to explain about my life, what it's like, what people like me do, why we do it, and how we do it. And there's lots of bits we're going to go through, so bear with me, and then we'll have some questions afterwards. I suppose the first question then, or the first issue, is what makes somebody go to war? What is a war reporter? I'm often asked, is it scary? Well, hell yeah, it is scary. And I, for example, hate loud noises, and I hate heights. And I'm always finding myself high up with something going bang very near me. So it's pretty horrible. It's chaotic, and as I say, it's definitely frightening. The key, though, it's not that you are scared is the issue. You should be. It's not that you're not frightened, because everyone I know who does this is in that. It is about being able to make decisions. One of the most crucial points of it is that you have to make a decision what you're doing and what you're going to do next, whether it's right or wrong. Now, all of you here have made decisions. Some of you've probably made some tough decisions today about what you want to do, and for the students about courses. The difference for war correspondents and their teams, and I say hostile environment correspondents and their team, is that their next decision could be the last one they make. And so a variety of factors come into the decision-making process, and I'll come through them. But the key to it is that you must make that decision, you must have planned, and you must do it on the best available information you have in front of you, because you can't do anything more than that. You can only go by what you think or know is going to happen next. I remember in 1994, I was with my Russia producer, Natasha Gorbachev, and we had decided to go into Grozny to watch what the Russians had promised was going to be a final assault. This was the first war in Chechnya, and to see what would happen with the Chechen rebels and how they would cope. So we decided to go to a position where we thought we'd have a reasonably safe overwatch position. It got very, very dangerous indeed. The Russians really meant business, and we had to withdraw from where we were. We decided not to go back the way we'd come in. That's a relatively standard procedure, and decided to go through a set of buildings. So the problem was the set of buildings were full of Chechen rebels. They took us at gunpoint through to a field hospital that was in an administrative building. And it was Ramadan, and they were taking a real hammering, and they were coming back getting more and more angry, and started turning on us as we were sort of standing at the back of the room. And after a while, a large group sort of came towards us, and a lot of shouting, and I didn't know what was going on. So I said to Natasha, that this isn't looking very good. She said, "It's worse than that, Stuart. They're deciding which one rapes me first." She was a pretty tough cookie, I have to say. So at that point, something had to happen. So I made the decision, and it sounds really corny now, but I got out my passport, said I'm a British citizen, and read the front page. I'm not sure how many of you have read it, but it's Her Britannic Majesty Secretary of State requests, I can't see anymore, requests and requires in the name of Her Majesty all those who it may concern to allow the bearer to pass freely without hindrance and so on. Shook it in my hand, and they all just looked at me like I was nuts. Of course, they couldn't understand a word I'd said. The point was, it stopped. And in that sort of pause, a voice from the back, "So what are you doing here?" in perfect English. And there was there were sort of murmurings. And this young guy, Pakistani guy, comes forward, really coolly dressed, Armani jeans, a black t-shirt, Ray-Bans on. And we're like in the middle of Grozny. And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, we're covering the war, of course. So he spoke to them for a while, and he just said, right, I'm not going to do anything more. So he disappeared. They then took Natasha and I out and said, well, you have to go across this courtyard and down some stairs. And as we were walking across, I could hear the sound of the guns go ch 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 ch. It was at that point I actually thought, no, I've seen all these pictures of World War II, of Jews, 1,000 Jews being taken off in a line by 10 Nazi soldiers and not running, not doing anything, not fighting back. And the funny thing is you don't. You just don't. I think human nature thinks you're always going to survive, but it looked really bad. They got to the end of the courtyard and had to go down these stairs into a cellar. And you could see it was very dark. And again, more what I thought was loading of weapons. I turned to Natasha and said, oh, I'm really sorry. And she said, it's okay. So we went in and the door opened and it was pitch black inside. And in the distance, after about 2 minutes or so, I could see a little lamp being turned on. And it started moving towards us. Couldn't see who was holding it. The gunmen were behind us and around us, but they hadn't done anything. And slowly through the darkness, light came through and a little lady came out and said in perfect English, I understand you're from Britain, would you like a cup of tea? You never know, it'll never be as you expect it's going to be. And that's something, well, another thing actually was interesting, that was almost certainly the first time that, certainly I had met, but the first known incident of Al-Qaeda being in Chechnya. That was the very start of it. It was a very long time ago, of course. So really, it is about making decisions. You have to stay calm when things are falling apart all around you, because they almost certainly do. And it is, I think, what makes the difference between hostile environment reporters and other reporters. Now, it's not in any shape or form of criticism. It's just a different part of the job, just in the same way that politics reporters do politics or entertainment do entertainment and so on. It is just a different skill, if you like. And some people are more comfortable doing hostile environments and some people are more interested in doing politics. I think it's also worth noting, actually, and this is really important, and it comes up quite a lot, it makes absolutely no difference if it's a man or a woman. I have good friends that are very, very, very good reporters, probably better than me. Orla Guerin from the BBC, for example, Emma Hurd from Sky, Alex Crawford, probably one of the best in the business, possibly the most famous journalist at the moment around, actually, and Chris Amanpour as well. All do wars. It makes not a bit of difference about what you do, how you do it. It's just a matter of whether you can or cannot do it. To be good, I think you have to have training. It's very, very important. People think, there's a lot of journalists at the moment that have entered into very dangerous places where actually they become something of a problem themselves. Now, whether they're actually proper journalists or want to be journalists is a different matter, but they can actually cause problems for other people. One of the no-nos that we have is that you don't usually take people in the car with you, because unless you know them really well, you don't know what will happen. And there's countless horror stories of people going into dangerous situations, then everyone the passengers absolutely freaking out, and you can neither take them with you any further, you don't want to go back, you can't leave them on the side of the road. So those are issues, and training is one of the issues that goes with that part of it. Training on the job and experience, they're all vitally important to continue to survive, and you have to keep doing it as well. It's not something that you just pick up and put down. It becomes part of your life. It is in many ways very much part of your life, your whole life in fact. Practice in this job does make perfect. Physically fit is actually quite useful too. Going into Syria on a number of occasions at the beginning, I had to walk 6 or 7 hours across mountains with full kit. If you have a look at the kit later on, it is heavy, and it's worth it if you know exactly what you're doing. In Israel, or the West Bank, Jenin was being attacked. There was a 10-mile exclusion zone, and I remember the BBC, he became our foreign editor, but he was at the BBC, couldn't believe it, because me, Garwin McLuckie was my cameraman, and Ben DePere, who is now the head of Channel 4 News, who was my producer, walked about 11 miles to get in, 10 miles to get into Jenin and take live pictures. So you can do it, and you have to sometimes, you need to be physically fit and across what you want to do. Also, you've got to be prepared to take a bit of pain. I was in Iraq, and we were in a firefight, and I was in a helicopter, or trying to get into a helicopter, and as I was lifting the kit in, under fire, my shoulder dislocated. And so I was walking around with this sort of shoulder rolling like that, and the helicopter pilot's going, get out, all the rest of it. And anyway, my cameraman had tried to hit it back in, and that really hurt. And then I lifted my arm, and it popped back in, and we jumped in the helicopter, and we got away. One of the things about all of this journalism is that it doesn't matter who you're with, things do have a tendency to go wrong, and I'll come back on that. But it doesn't matter, for example, even if you're with the British military, things often go wrong for them as well.
Pathfinders work in areas so remote there's no support. A truck's been damaged on a precipitous pass, and they try to pull it out.
It's going over. It's gone? It's gone.
Within minutes, though, they have it back on track, and the mission continues.
So one of the trucks has something of a bodge job to keep it going. One has completely stopped working, one has turned over. Our truck is now towing the one that's completely broken. And on the other side of us, this is the valley where the Taliban have been firing at us when we first arrived, and a few shots since we've been here. So it's quite a difficult day already. What with the accidents that have happened, and we've got to go down there. Deep in the so-called green zone, where the Taliban positions are strongest and where the opium poppies are grown, the last mission for the Pathfinders reconnaissance platoon on this tour to Afghanistan is underway. They know they're going to be attacked. They just don't know when.
I saw a puff smoke. See where that come from, yeah? No.
We reach a protective hill, but as we leave, we're lined up for attack by an RPG.
Good. Keep going, calm down.
We pull up behind another mound to debate our next move.
This was actually worse than we thought. We'd skirted around the town, but as we came in from one of the more extreme angles as soon as we arrived, we were engaged with RPGs and small arms fire almost instantaneously. And we've basically been trying to drive these two trucks through getting support from the pathfinders on either side of us, but it's been crossover fire. It's been pretty horrendous, to be honest, and it's still going on.
As you can see, I was pretty scared at that point, and that was actually genuinely horrendous. It doesn't don't quite get across how loud it was, and how much incoming and outgoing, which is of course one of the problems with war reporting. But I'll come to that in a moment. You won't know Gilles Jacques. I last saw him in Tripoli. He had come to find a friend of his called Bruno Gourdion, who I know very well as well. Bruno had been shot by a sniper in the throat outside Colonel Gaddafi's Bab el-Zizia compound, where we'd all been for the last few days. Mary Colvin had dinner with me 4 days before she went to Aleppo and died. She died in the same house that I'd been staying in. And it was, we'll come back to it later, but you've seen the pictures of the street that we were in. I escaped from Homs. Sorry, when I said, I think I said Aleppo for a moment, but I meant Homs. I escaped from Homs under fire continuously for hours. Alex Crawford and her team were caught in a mosque in Zawiya for 2 days, almost constantly under fire. About a few months after that, Alex and I ran down an alleyway with tracer bullets passing between our legs. We were running, and there's 6 bullets for every tracer, so it's as close as you can get. There are about 30-something people, maybe more, being held in Syria by jihadists. 2 of them are Sky News Arabia camera. Oh, 2 of them Sky News Arabia staff, and they're good friends of mine. We have Al Jazeera correspondents and crews being held in Egypt right now just for simply broadcasting. And last year, a very good friend of mine and a good friend of all of us at Sky, Mick Dean, our cameraman, was killed in Egypt. What's my point? Virtually none of those incidents are on film. Virtually none of them. It's difficult to film. It's sometimes too dangerous. The film gets lost, gets destroyed, it gets taken off you. And some of these huge events just simply don't exist. I estimate that I will spend 80% of my time surviving, driving, negotiating with people, looking for food, looking for water. In Darfur, I spent 6 hours a day with a hand pump at a sort of pool of water, just trying to get enough water so that my camera and I could actually continue to operate. So you only, if 80% of your time is doing that, by definition, you've only got 20% of your time to do the work. Add to that cameras sanitize pictures, and that's a classic case, that the Pathfinder story, and even other stories that I've done, they're not anywhere near as intense as they were at the time. So if you've only got what I describe as this golden 20%, you've really got to make it count. And there are 2 elements to making it count. First, there's the choices that you have to make, and secondly, is the preparation that goes in to doing those stories. Firstly, let me look at the choices. It's really quite simple, if you like. How far do we go? How far into this story do we go and actually get what we want? Do we cross illegally into borders into Syria and Libya? Do we go and engage with people who are known to take people as hostages and cut their heads off? How much will you get out of that story? That's the big question. It is actually, we work on what they call the risk for return equation. You have to estimate how good is this going to be, how revelatory is it going to be, and how dangerous is it? Is it actually worth it? Now, the description most journalists will go by is that you want to bear witness. That is our job. Lots of people who do this, we talk about it occasionally. That is why we do what we do. Mary Colvin often used to talk about that. The job is to bear witness. And if you're going to bear witness to what's going on, you have to take risks. There is no doubt about it. You just simply can't get there. If you want to expose what's happening, if you want to change things, you have to go in and you have to bear witness. Social media is hugely important in the coverage of modern news. Twitter, for example, gives us heat spots so we can actually see instantaneously what is happening. And there's whole sort of logarithms being invented to work out whether the people who are doing the tweeting are actually being honest. And I know that the original way of doing it was to draw up lists of people who don't normally lie, and if they're tweeting, then you can follow the hotspot. But of course, what has happened is you can't always be certain, and then they work on this is all being done, but they work on the heat, as it's called, and that information directs people to what they seem to think will be a good story. And there's colleagues of ours at Storyful who specialise in this, and they are seeing breaking stories 2 or 3 hours before the mainstream agencies, for example, are able to confirm it, because they're following the Twitter. All of those social media are useful, but it's not the same as an actual journalist team going in, because, as we've seen so often in the last few years with Syria, it's always, we can't verify these pictures, they purport to say that the rebels did this, they purport to say that the Syrian government did this. Only when people like me go there can our desk, can our presenters actually say, we believe this happened, we believe it is this series of events because Stuart was there and he said it was, and we believe him. So if you can't just depend, then you do have to have the journalists who go in. And so that risk to return is the vital key to the question. I suppose ultimately, if you believe that you're bearing witness and it is worth doing, then it is worth risking your life. And sometimes they come to fruition and people see things for the first time. This piece we're going to show you now is from Homs. No one had been there before, nobody knew what was going on for certain, and this is part of our report.
It's just after breakfast time. They're buying bread and preparing for the day ahead. Welcome to Homs. It's like this every day. The snipers don't stop. 9 people have died on this street corner this week. Not one had a gun. The Arab Spring has turned to winter. But in Syria, people are still dying for wanting freedom. That is all.
There's a real Sarajevo feeling about this. The sniper you can hear in the background, that's been fairly continuous now for the last 15 minutes or so. These streets should be full of people. Of course, they're not. They're hiding in alleyways trying to keep away from it. But every time someone comes out, every time it goes quiet for a little while, the shooting starts again.
Yasser Azi was gunned down. He leaves a wife and 4 children. They have a photo and memories of their father. Nothing else. He was just driving along a road. This is a war. Day after day after day, it's like this in Homs. It never stops.
Well, President Assad might try to silence the people, but there are 6 mosques that are turning out now as Friday prayers have finished and in and around the streets. It's incredibly dangerous. We've been walking past checkpoints all the way along this route. It's a danger from snipers as well. The building is just over there. But these people are absolutely defiant. They're going to go out every day if necessary to voice their anger with this regime.
So when that was done, nobody had actually been inside Homs and seen that in fact it was an actual uprising and that it wasn't just terrorists fighting against the Syrian army, and that they were, by and large, unarmed. So it's that sort of revelatory part of it that it does make it worth that trip. It was a very, very difficult trip. It took a long time. The second part then, if you have choices first, then the next one is preparation, and that's really one of the most important things. You have to invest in time. You have to invest actually in equipment, all sorts of things, but it is, if you want to make stories that are different, if you actually want to make the news rather than follow it, you have to be planned, prepared for every eventuality, and think about what it is that you're trying to do. You have to build networks, for example. You can't just wander into Syria. There was a whole network got us in there, and I have people that we employ in many, many countries. And you have to look after them because their lives are as much at risk as you, if not more, because they could be taken when I'm not there. And they're still working for us, so you have to look after them. And their inside knowledge is the difference between you surviving and not surviving. I know in Syria, a guide was taking me in. He's a smuggler, but I wasn't paying him. He was taking me in because he wanted us to get inside. We were about to walk into an ambush, and all we heard was a few whistles and some other noise, and he knew that the ambush was planned. So we went a different way. We went round the ambush, and that was a classic case. Without that network, undoubtedly we'd either been shot or taken prisoner. You also have to create the conditions within that preparation for you to be able to do the story. The Taliban that Alex and I went and interviewed and spent some time with took 7 to 8 months of negotiation, a lot of movement in and out of Kabul, and an awful lot of people to speak to make that happen. And you also might have to go, for example, we went to Swat Valley and into Syria, and I spent a month each time in a hotel room, hardly ever leaving, because you needed to take that time to make it happen. It's not just I suppose one of the big issues about planning, because if you don't plan, everything is going to fall apart. Things always change. That's a given. You know that's going to happen, but you have to have as much preparation done. And these are absolutely the key elements of what you do. And part of the skill, if you like, going back to my original point, is what makes people, or how do they do it, is part of that ability to be able to plan. As I said, there's investment in equipment, but there's also investment in people like myself, who the company let spend a lot of time doing this type of thing. And I want to show you a bit of video which sort of illustrates the point that I'm going to make here. I'll talk you through it a little. So we were filming, as I say, this taken, well, where did it get to? So we'd taken us about 7 or 8 months to be taken up to this place, where, interestingly, on the first trip, the Taliban were actually, who had come to meet us, were attacked by the British Army and lost 3 people, so they disappeared and then came back later. And we wanted to show how they put in roadside bombs. It took a lot to convince them to do it. It is dangerous for them, as you can imagine, because the helicopters are up in the sky. We filmed all this on infrared night vision, and this is them indeed putting in, sorting out and setting up this bomb. This is one of the big things that these roadside bombs have killed almost, well, certainly more than anything else in Afghanistan, for both particularly British and American troops. There was an awful lot of people didn't think that we should have shown these pictures. I have to say that the military were all quite happy that we did, and they didn't have a problem with it. But a lot of the British public seemed to think that this was wrong. See, that's really well organised. Very quick. This goes under a culvert, and then if there's a passing Land Rover or Jeep or anything, they use this command wire that they're putting in. It would go sometimes like a kilometre or so to blow up that bomb. So they're a long way from where the actual target will be, or where the actual bomb blast is. And of course they can then just disappear. So this is all being filmed on infrared. But that is what it looks like when it's being filmed on night vision. Now the point is, that bright light is infrared. The American and British helicopters, which we knew were in the sky, can see that absolutely clearly. And it's the same if you're working with those in Syria, because they have night vision too. The reason we're not filming on the night vision one from a distance was because you couldn't work in close with these guys. They didn't want the big camera with them. The significance of us doing that, me showing you that, we knew that the British and American military could see us, but I knew that the rules of engagement had changed, and that regardless of bombs being laid, they wouldn't attack us when we were near a mosque, and we were right next to a mosque. And I knew that. And that's what I'm talking about, the investment, because if we had filmed that anywhere else, well, it would have been blown up straight away. And I've been with them when they used to do that, and anytime anyone moved, they would blow it up. So we knew we could film. I mean, it was pretty scary, but we did know that we could film and we'd be able to get away with it. So that type of cool kit is useful, and it's something that that we, as part, if you like, of that investment that one makes in everything we do. So it's not just in people, but it's in kit as well. And I've got a bit of stuff here which I'd like to show you so that you can actually get a sense of what we're using and how we're using it. Should we come back to that after, or yeah, let's do that. Should we get the well, obviously that's the infrared, so we might as well do that now. Yeah. So that's the one that you could see with the light. So it's brilliant. You know, we could take all the lights out and we'd still be able to see. We'd still be able to see you. Okay. So we'll come back to that in a mo, if we may. This is Neil, by the way. Can we get the big camera? So that's your. Well, once it comes across, or Neil's unplugged himself. So this is your standard big camera. Now you get, you know, a lot of war zones these days, people don't really use them that much because they are blinking heavy, and this one has got that night vision on it. So you see, it's an absolute monster. But funny enough, if you would put it on in here, and we won't because you can damage it, but you actually can't really see very much. Strangely, infrared works better with no light. This stuff works like night vision goggles that the soldiers wear, exactly the same. Works by the light of the moon, and so you know that is when you would use it, which obviously therefore has limitations. So it's things, and its limitations because of its size. The little camera have you seen? So we use a variety of cameras. Say that we go. There's another one in between the two that we use. But the key thing here now is that the ability to transmit from places like Swat Valley and from Afghanistan is based on this bits of kit here. Now this is a BGAN, and that is well, it's basically a satellite dish. See, it's really tiny. It goes flat, and there you go. That is a vital piece of equipment because you can go live instantaneously with almost anything. So you have that. We have that, which is it's an Apple computer, but it doesn't have to be. Linked together, you're live. That's all you have to have with you. We also, these days, and things have changed, this is mine, and I filmed on this 2 pieces that ran over the last day or two, or last week or two. This is it looks like a digi camera. It's a good one, but you can get away, you can take that in and look just like a member of the public who's coming in, and yet it films full HD. You can put a microphone into it, and and away you go. And a lot of people, a lot of the BBC in particular, actually. In fact, the current RTS award-winning cameraman called Darren Conway, he uses that a lot, and it gives a very stylised picture. So that's the sort of kit we use, which is very high tech. Strangely, the prices come down, but they're still pretty good. Now, when you go into wars, of course, you've got to have proper kit with you that you have to wear. Mathilde, are you here? we have someone who's going to help us here to illustrate the sort of what we've got. So a little bag of goodies. You're going to like this. Okay, so there's your hat. Don't put it on yet. I'll put that. Here's your, oh, here we go. Here's your body armour. Oh, we're going to have that on in a minute. And then there's my favourite bit, which we've had to have these days, since Syria decided that they were going to gas people. We got one of these to put on. So we want to sort of show you the sort of bits that we go into war with, and what I would like Matilda to do is to put them on. Now, I'll give you a scenario, okay?
Okay.
So you're somewhere, and you're being bombed by rockets and things, but there is a possibility that there might be gas. What bit of kit would you put on first?
I'll put the helmet first.
Okay. You might get hit by a rocket. You'll certainly be killed by gas. That goes on first. While you're lying down. However, we'll make you do that. We're just going to give you a second. And can we take those lights out? Because I think we're going to do this in darkness and see how you get on. It's not that dark. Off you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's take your glasses, yeah. Right, pull it down. Yeah, good. Nice and tight. Yeah. Great, excellent, excellent. Now, body armour. Let's get that one. Good, good. Did very well. Fantastic, over the shoulder. Yeah. Good, good. Now the hat. All the way around. Okay, bear in mind you're being shot at this point, right? Okay. Good, good. And now you've got to put your kit on, obviously, because you're working, so you get this on your shoulder. That's quite heavy. Right. Now you've got to go for a run. Very good. Very, very well done. I'll take this off. Let's take the mask off. Very good. Now, if you can just stay there a second, because there's a few more. Leave that on for a second. Can you keep that? Keep it on.
Keep that on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Hair out of the way. Yeah, oh, very good. Right. So that was excellent. That is very important, and there's some quite cool stuff in this that you'll be. I'll tell you. Firstly, let's see what we've got in on. Good. Oh. Pack of cigarettes. Cigarettes don't kill you if you give them to the bloke with a gun. They work very well. Always worth having some with you. Right. So, a lot has changed in trauma kit over the last few years. Significant amounts. For a start, it fits into a bag that size. Let's take these out. You're right. These are just trauma bandages. You crack these open. They stay like this for a very long time, and you stuff them into the wound if there is one, and then wrap them up. That'll stop what they call a big bleed quite quickly. A few years ago, if a British soldier was blown up in Afghanistan, they would almost certainly die if they lost an arm or a leg. Then they started everyone having tourniquet. I'm not going to do it up. But a tourniquet will save limbs. And as I say, do it all, but there you go, get the point. Soldiers who used to always die no longer do, and they will often now go into battle with 4 of them on them all the time, on their arms, around their legs, because these are the main arteries they would do. So people didn't used to survive and now do. And of course, as we've seen from Afghanistan, there's a huge number of big problems of soldiers who have come back and have to be rehabilitated because so many of them have lost limbs. That's for a sucking chest wound. You've got to be pretty qualified to use that one. I wouldn't suggest to try it unless you have to. Well, that's the other bit for it. And these two bits of kit, which are great. Okay. This changed everything as well. That's burn shield. People used to get terribly blistered. You get terribly blistered if you're blown up in a tank or something. That will basically help that. And then this, and that is an absolute revolution. It's called Celox, there's loads of it, but basically it clots the blood instantaneously. It used to really hurt, this stuff. Well, I've never had to use it, to be honest, but I'm told it doesn't hurt like it used to. It used to burn. But you sprinkle it onto the thing and you stop really quite a big bleed really quickly. So those are vital bits of kit, and they've changed the way you can go into to war and actually hope, if you know what you're doing, to survive. And something that happens with all the TV companies and all the newspapers, in fact, is that we have training courses for all of these things, and we have to do them every year or two. In fact, I think I'm doing mine next week. Anyway, thank you very much. That was absolutely brilliant. Now you can disrobe. Get that off. You happy with that, sir?
Yeah.
Well done, Phil. Thank you. A round of applause. I want to basically just a few final thoughts about my job and what I do. I don't know if some of you listen to music on headphones and they sort of remind you of boyfriends or girlfriends or family or events in your life. Well, I sort of do that with some pretty dodgy songs as well. But we also, and I've talked to friends, do it as well, sometimes to music, but sometimes not. And we think about the stories that we do, and we think about how we could have done them better, and actually learn more from that than anything else, rather than how well we do, but all of us spend time thinking about them. I have to say that it is a very big world out there, and there's some really horrible stuff that goes on. But I think it's fair to say I've never been to a country that I didn't like, and I've never met any race of people that I didn't actually like as well, even though there's some nasties within it. Being a hostile environment correspondent, war correspondent, doing my job for so long has been a privilege and is a privilege, and I don't take it lightly at all. We take it very, very seriously. And I have to say, it's a final thing, I love my job and I love doing it every day. Thank you. Still on camera. Right, I know you sat there for ages. Does anyone want to ask anything? Because I've got plenty of time. I think we have a microphone.
Thank you very much for the lecture. A point I picked up, you mentioned some of the other news organisations that you respect and work with. When do you kind of draw a line, or have you ever drawn a line between, at the end of the day, getting the best story and beating a competition against the point that these are the same people doing the same job that I'm doing, and actually we should all be in this together?
Yeah, it's a good point. You are always trying to beat your opponents, no doubt about it. But you're not doing it in a sort of spiteful way. Now I have found people, Tim mentioned him earlier, like Alan Little, Fergal Keane, Alex Crawford, all of these people do not, Bill Neely from ITN, they don't mess about with you. They're not going to say, yes, it went that way. You know, others do, others certainly do. The best ones never do, because you're going to need help. And it's amazing how often cyclical help comes round. I remember I was in Colombia. We were covering an earthquake in a FARC region. That's the rebel group that's there. So it's dodgy as hell. And all of our equipment are completely broken. Nothing worked whatsoever. whatsoever. It was a disaster. And Alan, my cameraman, said, listen, you're going to have to go and knock on the door of that bus. There's a German bloke in there, but I know he's got kit. Go and ask him if he can use it. So I knocked on the door, and the guy came out, and I said, listen, I'm really sorry, but can I borrow your edit pack for 15 minutes? That's all I need. And he looked at me, and he looked, and I looked, and I thought, right, well, that's that then. He said, let me tell you a story. I'll make it brief. But some years before, in Peru, there was a presidential New Year's Eve party that was taken hostage by a load of guerrillas and turned into a massive story. He didn't have anything. His kit had fallen apart as well. And he went up to a bloke called Jeremy Thompson, who's our main presenter, and said, can you help me? And Jeremy said, sit down, I've got an editor, use my kit. And so many years later, he did exactly the same for me, and we were able to make the feed. So it will cyclically come round. And so, yes, you do your best to beat them, but you don't try to stitch people up if you can avoid it. At least I try not to. Any more?
So the people that were putting the bomb on the ground, you said that the US military or the British military were observing this situation. They would have blown you up if you hadn't been inside the mosque. Did they go back and dig it up afterwards?
Yeah, well, just so you know, and it was something we put out as a sort of health warning at the time, is that it was dismantled for us. We knew they were there because we could hear the helicopters, and if with their vision, they can certainly see anything that's going on. Yes, under the rules of engagement that changed, they plotted the location, and then and would have had it recorded, and then would send someone back to go and blow it up or see what was going on in that mosque, in that area. It actually didn't prove to be the best system, to be absolutely frank. The better system was actually just blowing anyone up, setting up a bomb, but they decided to stop doing that. In fact, they changed lots of their rules of engagement. For example, there was a firefight once where Taliban was firing at us, and they were firing back at him and missed. He put down the gun and walked out of the front door, and everyone just stood and watched him. And he went to another room, picked up the gun and did the same thing again, and put it down and went to another room. It was just unbelievable, but those were the rules of engagement, so they couldn't engage anyone who wasn't actually carrying a weapon. And it's interesting that Taliban, how they worked that out, maybe they just realised one day, but or whether they had intelligence, it's just as possible. But no, it's amazing how those rules of engagement have changed in Afghanistan.
Hi. We've seen some powerful clips tonight. I read some of your copy online. If we can wind back the clock a bit, how did you develop your skills as a reporter, and particularly your writing skills?
Right. Well, I was a trainee on I went to university. I read history, and then went as a trainee. I worked for free for quite a long time on the Glamorgan Gazette in South Wales, and worked for the Celtic newspaper group, which sent me to Newcastle to the TRN training course, which was then one of the really big, perhaps one of the most significant courses. Cardiff University was, I think, going then, I can't remember, but it was quite a prestigious course. And then went back and finished what we called indentures, which is basically an apprenticeship, if you like. Did that and then moved into newspapers up in London. So I worked in newspapers most of all. And then a friend got me an interview with the now defunct TVAM, and I think I went up from earning £20 plus expenses, the expenses being the telephone coins, coins for the telephone box so you could ring in your copy, to £108 or £230 a night. I mean, I don't think we pay £230 a night now. It was the best gig in the world, I think. Yeah, well, no, it's a whole other story. But so that was it. And actually, interesting there, I worked as a producer, and because we were working overnight. And TVN was a pretty rubbish news organisation. It wasn't a news organisation; it was an entertainment programme, but it had to do news. We got opportunities to write and do things at night, which sort of happens a bit at Sky, but not really. Things are much more difficult to get into now. Then it was all slightly either who you know or whatever. But I'm sure, as lots of you guys will find out here, what the level of expectation for young journalists going to work for news organisations, or even to get onto courses to do it, is higher than most of the work done by young professional journalists already. I mean, I talked to the Tom in Jerusalem, Tom Rayner, who's our producer in Jerusalem. The amount of work he did just to get onto his course at City University was absolutely staggering. I didn't do that in my first sort of 3 years of work, and he did it before he even started. So that's something, and it's something I'm sure all of you are going to find, that it is really tough to get in.
Do you have any regrets throughout your career in journalism at all?
Do you know what? It's a regret that I think about almost every day, and it's recent. I was in the Philippines, and it was really, really late. I can't remember what time of day it was, but we were really up against it to cut a story together to get a piece on. And a woman came over, which often happened absolutely constantly throughout the day, with her baby. And she was asking for help and things like that. And the producer sort of went over and gave her some water and bits and bobs. And but we didn't film it. We didn't film it. And to this day, I don't know why, but we didn't. But she'd given birth just after the tropical storm had struck, and that happened a lot. Actually, there was huge numbers of births straight after. But the baby died straight away, and she had walked around and never put the baby out for 5 days. And to this day, I don't know why we didn't do that story. At the time, I was just overwhelmed with so much stuff going on. So I think about that. So that's, I'd say, by far my biggest regret, well, at least recently.
Hi. 2 questions. The worst situation you've ever been in?
Sorry,
the worst situation you've ever been in? And also, where would somebody like you go on holiday?
Worst situations, you know, they're really difficult as to know, what the one I was mentioning about Natasha and I, that was pretty bad. I wasn't sure. That Pathfinder one, I mean, there was actually the day before that, we were in a firefight that lasted 8 hours, and it was about 50 degrees. I just thought, I'm going to die here. I mean, I'm just way too old for this. But the soldiers were exhausted as well. I mean, we spent 3 days in the desert sleeping afterwards. But that was absolutely horrendous. It is interesting. It's difficult to actually say what is the worst situation, because again, the most scary are wars. But 70,000 people died in Pakistan earthquake, and that was just horrendous. Absolutely everywhere you went were dead people. So it's difficult to actually say what was the scariest moment, but there have been lots of, or the worst moment. Holidays, it's interesting. I had to go recently to meet British jihadists on the border with Turkey and Syria, and we have risk assessments that are done on everything. We have a risk assessment if you're going to drive into Westminster. They're just always filled out. They have to be. It's just how insurance, I suppose, and it's just done. So the risk assessments for me, I can't remember. I think the foreign editor was saying that in 3 years, I think they're out of 5. I think of the worst risk. He'd never written one that wasn't 5 for any of the jobs I'd done. It's sort of absurd. Anyway, the last one was to go to Turkey. And there was worrying, and there was risk assessment, and where will you be in a hotel, and where will you stay, will you keep the engine running, all this sort of stuff. And I said, actually, just one thing, guys, I went to Turkey on holiday with the family this year, and that's all I'm going to do this time. It's just not a holiday. So I will, if I'm actually honest, I will usually, because I do go to all these places, I would say it's Turkey or Croatia or Spain or somewhere nice and calm. Actually, I just came back from Dubai, which was quite nice. So, yeah, those sort of places.
You'll have seen a lot of appalling scenes and filmed a lot of them that the British public will never get to see, because there is stuff that you just can't show. Do you think we ought to, as viewers, see more than we do about the reality?
absolutely 100%. And if there's anyone who argues with anyone at Sky, it's me about that. We sanitise. You'll go through whole war stories and never see anyone dead. You'll go to, we'll put warnings up about pictures that don't really show anything. We put warnings up about people talking about something that's being done. The most graphic example in recent times is the killers of Lee Rigby, the soldier who cut his head off, and ITV showing the tape of the hands and all that, and massive differences of opinion between the news organisations. And I think Sky decided on the taste issue it wouldn't show them. The Royal Television Society Award went to ITV because, in my opinion, they would make the right choice. I think they did actually get admonished by, I'm not sure, but I think it was for not putting enough warnings up beforehand. But the actual showing of the pictures were deemed to be in the public interest because it was so shocking. But certainly having to re-edit pieces because there's bodies in it and it's the Philippines, to me that is just absolutely absurd that we sort of pretend it doesn't happen. And then when you're actually talking about a good story that you want to actually change opinion, sometimes you have to show this stuff, because if you don't, then you've just completely missed the point. It's just another story. But if you actually say, this is why this is happening, and it is happening, sometimes you have to have the evidence, and I think you have to broadcast the evidence. Now, this is a huge issue, it goes on forever. My personal feeling is if you watch a 24-hour news station, you have chosen to watch a 24-hour news station. I don't think there's much doubt that you should actually be worried particularly about upsetting people, because they probably shouldn't be watching it if they don't want to watch news. ITV, BBC, that's more complicated, because obviously, especially the scheduling is around big programmes like the traditional News at 10. I think the ITV News at 10 had the most expensive advertising slot in the country for a long period of time, because the ad break was huge. So then you've got real big issues about what you're watching. But 24-hour news stations should be doing it. And of course, the other thing is that you can go on to the internet and you can watch as many beheadings as you want. I'm not saying we show beheadings, but you can go and look at anything you want on there, and it's got nothing to do, with what we do or don't say. So it's sort of academic, because watch it anyway. It's on YouTube.
Hi, you mentioned that your reporting in Syria was important to show that it's not just terrorists fighting against the government. I'm assuming you go there unbiased. My question is, do you arrive aiming to spend equal amount of time filming both sides, and do you leave them with a different view of the situation?
Yeah, I didn't say that. The Syrian government at that point was saying they were only fighting terrorists. What I felt we showed that they weren't. I can't go into Damascus. I'm on there. I would be arrested on arrival, absolutely 100%. I'm on a list. I think there's Paul Wood from the BBC, Arwa Damon from CNN. The three of us are certainly on a sort of kill list. But Sky, BBC, ITV regularly send people into Damascus to do the Damascus side of things, and I do the sort of rebel side of things. The problem now is that the jihadists are in such control, and we're making moves. We're making ground with them to let us back in, but there are some absolute loons out there that you just can't get past. So we would like to go in. I'd like to do. I have done them. I've been in when they were a bit more reasonable, but those same people are not reasonable now. That is an important story, and I would do it totally unbiased. It would, that's a very important point. I don't agree with what they're doing. I do understand why there is an uprising, but it's become a mess and complicated. But I would say, and actually, if you look at a bigger one than perhaps Syria, was the Iraq war, and for the first time we had embedded journalists, and a lot has been written about it, embedded journalism, and whether you can actually be independent. And my experience of being embedded a lot of times is you are not interfered with, but there is a question that if you spend 3 months with people, how independent are you? Now, I completely understand that argument. You try not to be, but you can see how that can happen. But at the same time in Iraq, we had people in Baghdad. And I feel that if you've got two sides covered and you're giving them an equal amount of time, then you're not biased one way or the other. So, we had people, as I say, living in Baghdad under the bombs that were coming in from the coalition forces, and you had people like me who were with those forces moving up towards Baghdad. And I think if you can do both sides of those things, that is the perfect scenario. I mean, the perfect scenario is not to be a target yourself and being able to walk around. In Africa, in the wars I covered in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Angola, Sudan, I was always independent. I wasn't with anyone, and no one gave a damn. It was, in fact, that both sides in any of the conflicts would be reasonable. It is only since the wars, the government wars, for want of a better expression, in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then the growth of jihadism around the Middle East and North Africa, that we've become part of the target. And of course, as we're seeing in Egypt, Al Jazeera reporters are being targeted as well. So, everyone is targeting journalists, whereas for a long period of time, I think they were seen to be, well, potentially get them on your side and get the point across. But that's changed. People who don't even want to talk to you, they don't care, and there's nothing you can do about that other than negotiate.
I want to hear your thoughts on where your job ends as a journalist and where your role starts as a human being when you're witnessing such terrible things and when there's bodies in front of you, people who need your help. How is it that you define that line of where you're reporting and where you're a human being that's in the same surroundings where you're compelled to help or to just drop everything and help someone get somewhere?
Yeah, that comes up a lot, and in fact, in the Philippines, me and my producer did have a major fallout over that, because actually she wanted to do a lot more and I didn't, it wasn't actually the girl with the baby, it was other things. Our job isn't to go, the aid agency's job is to save people. We can help, but the best thing we can do is give the picture and the story out. That is our job. Now, of course we help. And of course, if I've interviewed a family that got nothing, I'm going to bung them some money. I mean, that's just human nature. I'm not just going to ignore it. But of course, if you start, you will get a proper riot if you start handing out bottles of water and food. You're just going to get overwhelmed so fast that you'll be, it's dangerous, and you'll not file your story, and they won't get any more help. Like a lot of these things, if you think back to the famous Michael Burke Ethiopia thing, if that story had never been filed, nothing would have ever happened. Or maybe it would have. It changed reporting, but it changed history in many ways, and Live Aid and all the rest of it. And Darfur was not dissimilar. That had gone on for a long time before anyone did. So these type of things, it is important that you go and you send that story. That's not that often. Homs was a good one, because actually people did say, we know from the reaction from politicians, etc., that things make a difference, and that you can make a difference with honest reporting. And you just have to accept that that's what you do for a living. If you want to save people, then be an aid agency and make sure they get there quickly, which is a big problem they often don't.
Hi. When you film your piece to the camera and you're in a dangerous situation, do you get to rehearse and do a couple of takes, or do you literally just do it straight away?
I try and do them straight off the cuff if I can. Sometimes you can't not. Often there's mistakes in them, but you might try and if it's not too bad, you'll try and do a couple of takes. But actually, really, you've got to try and just say. The one when I was sort of like drinking from the water bottle and things, like Cameron just said speak, and I just turned around when I was drinking and he just said speak. And he was right, because you can see how scared I am and how exhausted and all the rest of it. But there are countless others. Some people speak very, very eloquently, and it doesn't matter what's happening, they just don't get the words wrong. I always do, and it's just how I talk. But sometimes I think, people might disagree, it's a bit more realistic sometimes. It's not just, here's one I did earlier, it is actually, he meant it. Words in your head. I don't know if you wanted to be a TV reporter, but writing it down and learning it is a disaster, because it's like learning a poem. As soon as you go wrong, you'll all mess up. So you might as well just think about where you want to go and just talk. We have a thing called As Lives that we have to do every now and again for either late bulletins or the middle of the night. And by definition, it's an as live. So you just do it as if somebody had asked you a question, which you already know what they're going to say. So you just speak to the camera, etc. It's a bit of cheating, but I think everyone accepts this, as we spoke to him earlier. I know reporters who will take hours doing them because they keep making a mistake and they keep making a mistake. Whereas I never take more than one take. It might be a minute, 2 minutes long, but there's loads of ums and ahs and here and there. But it wasn't as live. It's better than a perfectly rehearsed piece to camera, which they've either learned and is huge anyway. So people actually lose the way with them because it's not like listening to someone talking. I think that's actually the thing that that one of the skills of live reporting as well, and this camera is the ability to actually chat to people rather than have, here's one I prepared earlier. We have a thing called a donut. I absolutely hate donuts. You talk a load of nonsense after the presenter says everything that's happened. Then they throw to you and you repeat it. And then you go to the here's the one I made earlier. And then you come out the bottom and say, back to you, Bob. Hopeless. Nobody learned anything. Nobody asked me anything. It was just, it's like, that's what you got presenters for. Ask me a question. They come in and out of fashion. Sometimes I think at the moment they're out of fashion at the moment. Unfortunately, they'll be back in fashion soon.
Do you have any home comforts that you miss as well when you're away?
Sorry?
Are there any home comforts?
Home comforts? Yeah. Well, some obvious ones. Actually, you know what? One of the big things for me, I've never been a massive foodie. It doesn't particularly bother me. So it really almost doesn't matter what I eat. But I know lots of people really miss food. I never have. It's like whatever, we'll eat it. And obviously, the more extreme the place, the worse it gets. There's sometimes, actually, you can find fantastic food in really odd places that you think it's just going to be absolutely awful here, and it's absolutely fantastic. Yemen, fantastic food, and just odd things like that. But yeah, so I miss, obviously, I've got 3 kids, I miss them, and I'm away an awful lot. And my wife, obviously, I miss her. Whoops. Yeah, and obviously in a lot of countries these days, not being able to have a beer at the end of the day, which is always one to miss, but that's the nature of the Middle East at the moment.
How often do you find soldiers that you're with are unhappy about your presence?
Embedded soldiers, you mean, or anyone? Well, actually, can I just also mention that on the embed thing? Everyone criticises the embeds of being with the British and American military, etc., etc. If you're with rebel groups, you're every bit as embedded as you are with the other side. I mean, that is the definition. You're living with them. So it doesn't have to be the most evil thing that's ever happened. It's just a fact. You're no less embedded. I've been with Hamas and Hezbollah on missions. I mean, that's an embed, 100%. But both of them, be it rebel-y types or army types, yeah, you will get some resentment. And a lot of the best way it works is you need to spend some time. So they're absolutely convinced. I mean, the MOD is convinced they're going to get stitched up at every turn. And newspapers have turned them over a few times. But actually, TV as a rule doesn't. It doesn't sell papers. It doesn't sell anything particular by revealing that the British soldiers don't have the right boots or whatever. But they get really bent out of shape about this type of thing. And they're absolutely convinced that you're always going to turn them over in some sort of shape or form. So you spend a bit of time with them, and they know. And then really it's down to their senior officers and the NCOs. If they say it's all right, the men will do as they're told. One of the guys I worked with was a bloke called Jim Foster, who was in the SAS for about 20 years. And he was the cameraman with the Pathfinders. As soon as I'm with Jim, I mean, he's like a hero to them. He's quite famous for a whole lot of things I can't possibly tell you about, but they all know him. And so then, that's instantaneously, it's not gone. If I'm with Jim, he's not there. I mean, Jim is our cameraman, but he is also obviously one of the best security people you can have. Sort of thing. So you've got to manage that, and you've got to get to know them. But a throw-in embed that lasts hardly any time is actually a disaster, because they just won't cooperate with you because they don't want to and don't need to.
You strike me as quite a nice fellow. What will make you stop?
Probably the company sacking me, I would imagine, is the most likely the most likely option, and then trying to find a job. I don't know. I don't see myself as a presenter, which is a sort of like bit of a traditional thing that people get older and move into it. I'd say that. I remember a long time ago being interviewed somewhere, I think I was in by my 30s, or early 30s, and I laughingly said, I won't be doing this when I'm 40. Ha ha ha, well, I'm 49. And I'm still going. So as long as I can still keep doing it, and still, physically capable of doing it, and I will continue to do it because I enjoy it. I mean, it is good fun.
What about the kids and the wife who you mentioned?
Yeah, one of the interesting things, and it is a big issue, it comes up, our industry is full of broken marriages, but I met my wife when I was at university. We've been together since we were 18, and my children were all born when we were on the road. They've never actually known anything different. So, yeah, I think my daughter was the only, my second son was the one that was the only one who was slightly wobbly about it for a short period of time, but I had a sort of chat with him and said, look at everything you've got, this is where you live, that's how somebody pays for it, and that's me. And it's sort of like he got the message as he was playing his PlayStation. Ultimately, it's a great job and I love doing it, it still pays the bills.
Just be careful, okay?
Thank you.
Sorry, I just have one more quick question. I don't know if you can answer this. I was just curious as to how you got into both Israel and Lebanon.
Because, well, I don't, I mean, you wouldn't get into Lebanon from
Yeah,
Israel.
from Israel.
No. I did them both, but I would have probably gone via Jordan from one to the other.
All right, okay, thank you.
I was interested just now when you said that you worked in Israel and in the Arab states. Do you have to have two passports?
I have three. I've got this one here, and this one here, and there's another one on the way. There's one actually. I've got actually for a short period. I have four. The other one's getting a visa put in it for somewhere else. They didn't actually tell me. They just said send us your passport. I go through. I mean, this one is absolutely knackered. I think it's only 2 years old. I go through passports incredibly quickly, but yeah, you have to have different passports. The Israelis are all right actually. They stamp your passport. They know it's finished. So you ask them not to. So they, as a rule, don't. And even if you've annoyed them, they will. But so you're usually okay there. But it's not just that; it's other countries as well. Other who are having big disagreements that you can't have one when you've got the other. So yeah, lots of passports.
How much control do you have over the stories you report, or are you reliant on your editors sort of telling you?
Interesting. First off, you take 100% control over it, but it's a bit more complicated than that because we won't have gone on some of these quite. I put up a lot of stories, and they're often quite expensive, and so there has to be a fair amount of debate as to where they will do. And I would say they're expensive not because I'm paying people, but because they just take a lot of planning and a lot of flying around and things like that. And as a result, you've got a sort of editorial committee who's working out whether they think it's worth it, and there's all that risk stuff that I was talking about. But after that, when it actually comes to it, I mean, the Taliban story, I think the original piece is 8 or 9 minutes long, so it might even be longer. I don't think there wasn't a change put in it. Now, the other influence, though, and I like being a team player. My producer, if I have one, I often don't. My cameraman, who will edit the piece as well, as a rule, not always, but their opinions are hugely important. You don't take them lightly. Some do. Some people just ignore it and say that's a script and that's the time codes, and you just do it. But I always like to have a chat. When we did the British jihadis recently, we had I think nine sets of interviews that were done. I didn't do them because they couldn't come out of Syria and I couldn't go in, but we did, a guy who was trusted by them did them for us to our questions. But we had a huge amount of material. There's only so much you could possibly put together. So the producer Sarah and the cameraman Ronnie and I would do a sort of, actually because he was obsessed with the X Factor. So we would do an X Factor night for 2 nights where we would listen to all the various grabs that we liked and vote to who would go through to the next round. It was hilarious, actually. It was quite a bit of fun. to the X Factor jihadi. And that's how we made it. So, you know, they voted me out on a number of things. You know, of course, in the end, I could say, no, get stuff, we're putting it in. But it was much more fun. And we got the best stuff. And we were able to work out, we wanted one bunch to say something about that subject, and that subject, and then sort of we whittled it down. Because without it, I'd had to have made those decisions on my own. And there was a lot of material. And you just get overwhelmed with it all. You want to use all of it, and you can't. That's when you end up sending in enormous pieces, which people like Neil refuse to run.
You talked briefly about interviewing, families, mothers and children. Do you ever feel like maybe by talking to them, putting themselves at risk, and then if they are, is it really worth it?
Generally speaking, in a conflict zone, for example, yeah. Well, first off, certainly when you talk to children, like the kids in that, you can get very emotional. I mean, my kids are either the same age or certainly were their age, and all families. And there were cutaways of me in tears, non-stop. I think anyone and everyone goes through that. But we don't film anyone unless they want to be filmed. So it's just a matter of, it would just be wrong. So we will always, I approach them first and ask if they'll talk. The camera's not rolling. And if they say yes, he starts. So you have to be mindful of that. But you're right. And lots of people, and again, people who work for us, their lives are at risk every day because they would. And also, one of our guys in Turkey, he lives in a refugee camp. He goes in and out. He's a very nice man, and he's supporting an enormous family from working for the media, but mainly for Sky News. He's a target to people in the camp because they all know he's working for the foreigners and he's going to get a lot of money. So, relatively speaking, a lot of money. In fact, relatively speaking, a huge amount of money. And you have to be mindful of all of those things. From the people you interview, to the people who translate for you, to the people who guide you, and everyone involved in the whole process. And there are instances, there's famous stories, and Tim would know more of them than me, and I'm certainly not going to go into the names of things, but people have, as they say, been burned by reporters who have done things, shown faces which they said they wouldn't. And there are instances where clearly those people have died as a result.
Have your personal feelings towards the situation ever influenced the way you report something?
Yeah, they sort of do. You try to be, you are objective, but if you're actually seeing a bomb being dropped on a bunch of kids, and they clearly aren't in any shape or form shooting anything, it is very difficult to be totally objective. It's quite clearly a disgrace. It's an act. It's not an act of war. It is. I can't think of the word. It's a crime. So then you have to see that side. But if for example, Syria is the current big one. There are people who support the government side who are suffering hugely as well. And that needs to be reflected. So although I have a natural affinity towards the rebellion because I was there when it started and I saw them dying when they were not shooting anything, then that is something that's my problem. But that has changed, and so I've sort of changed with it. And now I would say that I feel very much less affinity to any of the rebel side now because they've changed their rules of engagement as well. Whereas before it was just literally people like here going out and saying we want to have a vote that matters. But you have to watch yourself, and in fact, certainly that's where the team works to actually pull it in. It's very easy for also reporters work together, get a bit carried away. I know there was a team, I think it was the Times, Independent, a few others went into this place in the West Bank called Jenin, and between them ruled that it was a massacre. And I'd been in there before them, and I determined that, in my opinion, it wasn't a massacre. There was a lot of fighting, but massacres are going to smell really an awful lot worse than it smelled. And that was the first indicator to me. There just wasn't enough dead bodies for it to be a massacre. Those were headlines. They were later proved to be, they were incorrect. It wasn't a massacre. A lot of fighters died from, Palestinians died, but they were actually engaged in a proper fight, as it were. And the Israelis weren't lying. And obviously, we now have a whole room of a new extra section, which is about propaganda and truth and all the rest of it. And that leads to a whole load of things, because what one military is saying, I mean, if you look at Afghanistan, the amount of mistakes that have killed lots and lots of innocent people is just absolutely staggering, the numbers. And of course, President Karzai is absolutely furious because of it. And yet, when the initial reports come out, invariably, the British and American military or NATO will say that they were after legitimate targets and suspects, etc., etc., and then a bit of video comes out and shows that it wasn't. It was a bunch of kids. So that happens all the time.
You're surrounded by war and chaos and destruction and kids being murdered. You're either A, on a very strong form of antidepressant, or B, there's something that's keeping you going. What restores your faith in humanity?
Well, I said, I very rarely meet peoples that I don't particularly like. And places I've been, as I say, there's always nasty people within it. But most people generally, I've never found to be anything other than nice. You do, and if you take the wars out of it, if you go into disaster zones, they do get you down because they are awful. But people are incredibly resilient. I mean, staggering how people can get themselves together. I mean, especially non-Northern European countries. I mean, the things that people can cope with in the third world countries is absolutely staggering. And funny enough, it actually puts them in an advantage, because if you live in a tin shack in Congo and it gets knocked down by a volcano, you go and get another bit of tin and you build yourself a house again. They can cope with a whole load of stuff that we simply can't cope with. We talk about the Somerset levels and the hysteria and all the awful things. I mean, that's absolutely nothing to what happens in places like Bangladesh or the Philippines on a regular basis. So I think that those people are able to deal with things much better, and that actually keeps you going to a certain degree. I mean, actually, it's something I haven't been asked about. I usually am asked about it, but it does come up. Was the post-traumatic stress, which is something that a lot of people deal with. I think there was a survey done in the United States, and I think they said 90% of American foreign correspondents who've been in war have serious traumatic stress. Now, that's an American estimation, which is always going to be exaggerated, but even if it's, by definition, but if it's 40%, it's still a lot. And I'd say Alan Little has written quite a lot about it, and I've had long chats with him, Fergal Key too. There's ways of coping with it, actually, because you usually come back from something fairly traumatic and you're pretty rubbish for 2 weeks, and there's two ways of dealing with it. To get absolutely smashed and beat the wife, or you can try and not and spend time with your family. And it's something that the army have been trying to deal with for absolutely decades, if not hundreds of years. And journalists now, of course, are being exposed much more so. The other thing, actually, which is interesting, just quickly on that, the British military, or all military, they finish their war, and then the guys go on decompression. They don't like it, doesn't last very long. Then they go back to camp, and they're not allowed out straight away. They have to stay at least another 2 nights. If they don't do that, they literally do go home and get pissed and beat up the missus. So they've worked out that that's the best system. Soldiers don't like it. In the reporting of news, quite a long time ago, you go back to Vietnam and Brian Barron and Keith Graves, and great reporters they were, it took a long time for that material to get out, ages. And, the film had to be developed and they had to do all these things. I mean, it could be, days and days and days, if not weeks, before these images came out. And that was their travel would get back. I came back from Moscow today. I mean, Moscow, I used to live in Moscow, so I know it very well. Some people find it quite traumatic. They're here. Our team in Ukraine could be back straight away, having been live in the Maidan Square, for a week. Now that's traumatic because there's no cooling off point, and that's when it's important and incumbent upon the companies to give people time to cool off. And actually, unfortunately, 24-hour news stations aren't very good at that, because if you come back from a story and you're a bureau and another story happens, you're sort of expected to go and do it, and that's when you can start getting compounded post-trauma, and people take a long time to recover from that, and it can actually put them out of business. You know, they stop working because they just can't do it anymore.